Thank you so much for coming. I know that it's probably tempting to take off at 4:15, so I really appreciate you being here. My name is Michele Van Hoeck. I'm an instruction coordinator at the California Maritime Academy. A lot of people don't know that we're part of the CSU, and that's why I put our CSU Maritime identity up here. We're a really small school. I'm going to be co-presenting with Roselle and Cathy Palmer. They'll come up, we'll present in sequence. And what we'll be talking about, of course, is project information literacy and how we took those, some of those findings from several studies. We picked a few that we would like to tell you that we used in our instruction and outreach programs at our respective institutions. So my job right at this moment is to give you kind of a quick overview of PIL, and then I'm going to tell you about one study and how I used two findings from that one study, and then Ann will take it from there. So here's the logo of Project Information Literacy. Because I worked for a newspaper for a long time before I was an academic librarian, I'm going to give you kind of a newspaper style who, what, when, where, how, and why on PIL. So first, who are the PIs? The investigators are Allison Head and Michael Eisenberg. They both are based at the University of Washington Information School. And you may recognize Dr. Eisenberg's name because he was the developer of the Big Six model of information literacy that a lot of K through 12 schools use. So he has a long history with information literacy. The other important who, and maybe probably the more important who, is who's being studied. All the PIL studies are focused on college students in the United States, and they've talked to about 11,000 students over the course of 5 studies. On 52 campuses. Right now, I'm actually part of the research team. I joined last year to help out with the tech study in gathering data and helping with the report. And right now, what we're doing, what we're working on, the 6th PIL study is looking at how recent grads perform information literacy competencies in the workplace. So they're not college students anymore, but they used to be college students very recently. And we're interviewing employers as well as doing focus groups with recent college grads. So what? All the PIL studies are information-seeking behavior studies. They're all through the lens of student experience, which means that the social science methods that they use are focus groups, surveys, interviews, and content analysis. Ann is going to focus on the study that did a content analysis of research assignment handouts. And so basically, PIL is not looking at what students know about research. They don't use standardized tests. They don't test students' knowledge. They talk to students about how they conceptualize research, how they think about research, and what strategies they use when they're seeking information. So here's the timeline. I said there were 5 studies. The first study in 2008 was fairly small. It was on 6 campuses, focus groups with students on 6 campuses. The 2010 study that I'm going to talk about is the largest, and that took place on 25 campuses. And here's the 2012, the ongoing study. Here's a map showing the colleges that have been involved. You can see this is all across the US. I want to highlight the fact that PIL has talked to a wide variety of students on a variety of campuses. So there are many community colleges in the sample, many large state universities. My school, which is a state school, is very tiny. It's only 1,000 students. They've had a couple of Ivy League schools in the sample and other private universities, so it's a pretty good diversity of schools, colleges. How is the money piece? There have been a variety of sources of funding for PIL over the years. The current 2012 study has funding from the Berkman Center at Harvard, and they have a grant from IMLS. And here's the why. Why should you care? I think that anything to do with information literacy that is original data, I would think that most librarians would care, or I think most information literacy instructors would care. But what I want to point out is how important it is for us to know about the students that we're teaching and to hear things from their perspective. What strategies are they using? Not what do we want them to use, but what are they actually doing? What practices are they applying from instruction? And how are they using the library? How are they using the library's services and the library's resources when they are seeking information? So here's where I'm going to focus on a single study out of 5 that have been completed. This was the very large survey of students on 25 campuses. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this study, and then I'm going to tell you what I took from it on my campus. This is a shot of the report. It's called Truth Be Told. All the reports that PIL has done, the white papers are on their website, projectinfolit.org. There was a focus here on how students evaluate information, but also how they use information. And here's the one slide, who, what, when, where, why, or how, I guess. They talked to over 8,000 students, no freshmen, just sophomores, juniors, and seniors. They asked questions about both course research and everyday life research. They had about an equal division. They asked the same questions about course research as they did about everyday life research. It took place in the spring of 2010, 25 campuses. It was an online survey that was distributed via email. There were librarian liaisons on each campus that helped make that possible. I was a liaison. I believe Cathy was a liaison for a later study. We got the IRB clearance. We helped get the email addresses released for students. And the 22 questions that were asked were really a pretty wide range, not only asking students what they use and how they conduct research, but also how they evaluate what they find, and some effective questions as well. They asked students about what was hard about research, and they asked them about what motivated them. I found those responses particularly interesting. I presented at my school to the faculty and told them about what students found, what was motivating to students when they were working on a research project. So like I said, I'm going to just focus on 2 findings from this one study. And one finding is related to this one question I've mentioned, what's difficult about research? And the way the question was phrased to students in the survey was, from the moment that you get the assignment to the moment you turn it in, so anywhere in that time period of doing a research project, what's hard? What's difficult? What do you find hard about that? So if you read the abstract, you know kind of what they said. Does anybody want to, if you were to break it down into small pieces, anybody want to hazard a guess about what students said was the very most difficult thing? Yeah, that's what it was. Maybe someone has read the report. Here are the top 3. Very good, very good. Here are the top 3 responses, and there were a large number of choices. Students had I should know this, probably about 20 possibilities that they could have identified, and they could identify more than one, of course. And the thing that almost all students said was hard about research was simply getting started, and then the next 2 had to do with finding a topic and narrowing a topic. And I want to maybe some of us already feel like we knew this, and I want to highlight something about this. Well, first of all, of course, all 3 of these are from the early stages, the first stage of the process. They had a choice of talking about writing. They had a choice of talking about citation style. They could have chosen evaluation. All those things were in their choices, and the 3 top things came from the very beginning stages. So this is a quote from the report, Failure to Launch. That's this section of the PIL report. One cool thing about this study is it wasn't just an online survey. It wasn't just that quantitative data. PIL identified several students that took the survey and did follow-up interviews with them to ask them more about what they said. And when they talked to them about this difficulty with getting started, what students said I thought was interesting. It wasn't a lack of ideas. It wasn't that they were struggling to come up with something to write about. What they talked about a lot of the time was a fear of their idea failing them, like an inability to vet their topic, to decide if their topic was worthy of writing about. The PIL report actually used the word desperate. They said they were desperate for context, desperate for background. And they used Wikipedia very heavily. That's no surprise. I believe it was about 85% said that they used Wikipedia for background and context at the beginning of the process, despite being told not to. They knew they weren't supposed to, and yet most of them did. So I got the report for our campus. Each campus that participated got an individualized report as a result of what their students on their campus said. I got that in the summer before the final report was out, and I had a chance to make some changes fairly quickly in the fall semester. I teach a semester-long 2-unit class called Information Fluency, and one thing that we decided we were going to do, I have a colleague who also teaches it, was expand, like blow out the time, a little bit more time in the semester for this stage of the process. That the early stage was clearly hard and was clearly causing them grief, and we wanted to help them with that and help them develop some methods for exploring new topics, vetting new topics, maybe give them some alternatives to Wikipedia to get context and background. Now, I decided not to spend too much time in this session telling you about what I did in the semester-long class because I think more people than not do one-shots. So I want to actually move and tell you what I did in a one-shot. We did have the luxury of time to do some things in the semester-long class. But I think more challenging is to think about how you could do this kind of expansion of instruction in the early stages in a one-shot. So what I'm going to tell you about is what I started to do, not immediately in the fall of 2010, but what I started to do the following year in 2011, when I had a chance to revamp one particular one-shot session I do, which is actually a two-shot. In the English 100 sessions, where I would go in 2 times during the semester, and I had been doing some, pretty fairly traditional sessions with database searching, and I did some keyword brainstorming and some book catalog, how to use the book catalog, that sort of thing. And I totally changed how I did my first of 2 sessions with English 100. And what I started with was a poll everywhere. If you're not familiar with this, this is a web-based poll where students use their phones to text the answers in class to a question. And I posed a question to them which was taken from the PIL study, which was, sometimes I would say, what's the worst thing about doing research? What's the most hateful thing about a research paper? Sometimes I would say, what's the most difficult thing? So here's a word cloud of the kinds of responses I got. This is just from my most recent semester's worth. I haven't saved, several semesters worth of these, but I plugged spring 2012 responses in here. You can see that citations come in for a good bit of hate. But you can also see the words finding, starting, procrastination, and topic are pretty well represented here. And here's kind of a pullout of some of my, the most illustrative quotes. Again, just sort of randomly selected. Just doing it, miscommunication, finding the research citation, and how to start it. And my favorite one, picking a topic and then finding out it's lame sauce. So when I saw that, I thought, that must be autocorrect. I don't think that could possibly be a word. I know I'm kind of out of it. I mean, of course, I liked it because it sort of, reflected what students had told PIL. But I did go and look it up. And it turns out it is a word. So it's just something that's extremely, extremely lame, something that's not fun, interesting, or beneficial in any way, shape, or form. So, of course, I have to credit urbandictionary.com. What would we do without it? At least me at my stage in life. So let me tell you what I did then. The poll takes 5 minutes. It's actually really kind of fun, and I think it shocks students a little that I asked them to take their cell phones out in class. I was working from a LibGuide, an English 100 LibGuide, and I had created this guide in the fall of 2010 after I had gotten the PIL results. And of course, I made a Getting Started tab. Oh, students really need help with getting started. I have to make sure I identify that in a tab, and I give them sources for getting started. But I didn't really do anything with that information or with those sources in the classroom. I continued along with my usual instruction in the fall of 2010, and it was only later on in 2011, and I had made this change with the poll, that I actually started taking the entire first session on getting started. So instead of database searching and the book catalog, et cetera, I decided the whole session was going to be devoted to these types of sources. So I closed the poll, and I told students that about the PIL study. I told them very simply that there had been a national study that our students had participated in, and that one question asked them what was hard, just like I had just asked them, and I told them what students said. And I said that getting started and picking a topic were considered the most difficult, and that we were going to get over that first hump today, that we were going to get started in class on these projects. Excuse me. And then I went on to describe to them these sources. These, I only told them about electronic sources. I really feel like, you know, we need to compete with Wikipedia on this. I mean, I feel like they need to be at least close to being as convenient as Wikipedia. And so I would describe the ones that I thought were appropriate for that section, explicitly comparing them to Wikipedia, and explicitly telling them how they might be similar to what they were familiar with and maybe a little different, and of course, more authoritative and written by professionals. The students spent about half the class exploring their topic, and I would work with them individually, and then at the end of the class, we debriefed. So how do you assess this? I think it's really hard. I think what we're working with here is ACRL Information Literacy Standard 1, you know, framing a topic, figuring out what your actual question is. I think this is a hard thing to assess. I thought, oh, you know, do you look at how many last-minute reference desk questions there are? You know, how much procrastination is happening? Do you look at the topics themselves and the papers that get turned in? Do you collect papers and look at what, you know, what type of things they decide to write about? Well, what I decided to do was just use the LibGuide statistics, but in a certain kind of way, because I felt like I needed to be careful with the LibGuide statistics. If you don't use LibGuide, they'll give you a simple statistical report for hits. They'll break it down by the sources that are in your guide by month. So what I did is I happened to have this sort of time shot or snapshot of the same guide, same computer classroom venue, but a new lesson plan. So I had fall 2010 and fall 2011 that I compared. And how I decided to work with the LibGuide stats was I really didn't feel like it was fair to just look at the number of clicks. I mean, it counts every click. And I think what's interesting about library websites and web resources is a lot of websites look at metrics wanting to keep people in the site, but what's different about libraries is we actually want to send people out. You know, we care more about getting them out to a resource rather than how long they spend on our site. So that's what I decided to look at. I only looked at statistics for how many times students went from a LibGuide to an outside resource that we had recommended. So here's what I found, and actually this is not surprising at all at first glance. You know, I changed the resources of the day, and of course they clicked on them. I told them to. We were in a computer lab. This number is the number of links that were made per student. So I didn't look at the totals because I had different numbers each semester, and so I just divided by the number of students. This is over the whole semester. But what was really shocking to me when I looked at this, when I graphed this, was the 0 in fall 2010. That when I didn't instruct on getting started resources or background context resources, they completely ignored them. They were not there, even though they had said getting started was the most difficult thing for them. Just putting it, and that was my personal first conclusion from looking at this data, that just having a getting started tab in your LibGuide is not enough. That, at least in my experience on my campus, it takes some instruction, it takes or marketing. Another thing I saw when I looked at overall links, not just to the getting started resources, but to how the LibGuide was used in general, I was very surprised to see that there was a big increase in links to outside resources. These are resources like databases, resources like websites that I recommend. Any outside recommended resource actually tripled between the 2 semesters. You know, this is not a controlled experiment. There are other things that could have come into play here. I'm not really sure what they are. But one thing I'm thinking was that I connected better with the students, or that maybe at an early stage, at the initial stage in terms of getting started, the guide was maybe perceived as more relevant or more valuable. But this is what I saw. And this is what I took from it. The second finding that I want to tell you about is from the PIL report, which was a surprise to me, was that students told the researchers that basically when they evaluate information, they often consult with other people. Now, maybe this is a no-brainer to other folks here in the room, but to me this was really surprising. When I thought about my own research process and how I search and then evaluate, that's always solitary to me. I never, ever would have thought of that as a collaborative process. What students said in personal research, they're the number one type of person they talked to about evaluating sources was friends and family. And the number one type of person that they talked to for course research evaluation of sources was instructors. Now, I just put the number one. There were other types of people that students preferred or liked to talk to about evaluating sources. So what did I do with this? I'm going to tell you about going back to the semester-long class. We use Moodle at my school, and so this is a shot of the Lib 100 Moodle page, and Moodle gives the opportunity to add as many online forums as you would like, but this is an in-person class. I ended up borrowing kind of an online instruction tool for an in-person class, and that was, I started using online forums more and more for in-class exercises. The reason I did that, I mean, there were a couple different reasons, and here's some examples of the types of things, the types of evaluation forums I had students do. I gave them alternatives to Wikipedia. I paired them up and gave them a task and had them try to background a topic using both Wikipedia and another source, sometimes print, sometimes online, and then I had them write up what they found in the forum, and if they had similar ones, they were grouped together. I had them compare article databases. I would teach them about Academic Search Elite and then give them one other without teaching them about it and have them compare the two, what they found, and describe what they found in the forums together with a partner. And then we had several website evaluation exercises that were recorded in forums. And just as a side note, you know, the forums kind of don't stand by themselves. We'd always talk together as a class after they had done their work, and I would try to summarize what students were finding and saying in the forum so everybody got to hear it, not knowing if they would go back and read them or not. So how do I assess this? How did I assess this new technique, this new teaching technique of collaborative evaluation? And I think I forgot to say that before I read that finding in PIL, almost all the homework, almost all the work that I had students do in evaluation was at home. Like I had sent it home with them to do by themselves. And I just brought it all back into the classroom. And it may not have always even been graded. You know, the in-class exercises were more like you were there, you did it, you got credit for it. So in terms of trying to assess how successful this was, what I decided to do was look at the final projects in Lib 100 that they turned in up until this semester. We're doing something very different this semester, but in the past, they've turned in an annotated bibliography, and I pulled out just the websites that they sourced or that they cited. I had 2 semesters worth of projects from before this change, and I had 3 semesters worth of projects after I made the change. And I just basically went through and looked at every single one. I had 266 sites to just websites, and I gave them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And I was fairly stringent. I assessed them based on the criteria we had used in class, authority and purpose criteria. And here's what I found. So before I did the data, before I looked at what I had, my impression was that things had gotten better. Since my first year at Cal Maritime, and I had changed the way I taught this, including this collaborative evaluation set of exercises, my sense was that the solid websites were getting higher in number, and the sketchy stuff that made me want to pull my hair out and wonder, were they even in class, were they even listening, had kind of gone down. And I did see that's what I saw when I looked at the 266 sites. This looks very nice and scientific. Of course, there are many factors that could have influenced this. Please accept my caveat about that. I put an arrow here neatly where things continued to improve. I guess basically to me this was good news. of the several things that we had changed and how we were doing things, it seemed to be having a positive effect in terms of the work that students were doing. And I do want to mention one other change we made in how we taught students about evaluating websites. We stopped pretty much altogether using the sort of classic fraud hoax websites that I used to use to teach about why they needed to be careful and why they needed to be critical thinkers. And instead, I was using these kinds of sites. And these were real sites that had been submitted to me by students in the early years. The press releases that just made me scream that they had turned them in as a source, anonymous student projects on EDU websites, hobbyist sites, lobbyist sites, and content farm articles. Those were the kinds of things that we used in class that they used the forums to evaluate together with a partner. So this is another big change that I want to make sure you know that was included. So my conclusion, I'm not trying to say that doing things collaboratively is the end-all be-all, but I see it as part of a more successful lesson plan. I think that the way we're teaching evaluation in the class is working better, is more effective, and this is one piece of it. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Ann Roselle from Phoenix College. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm sure you can hear me. You can hear me back. Okay, thank you. And I also wanted to, as Michelle said, thank you guys for staying so late in the day. It's wonderful. I'm going to be talking about a different PIL report, which is their third report. And in 2010, PIL published this study where they looked at research assignment handouts. And in their study, what they did was they examined to what extent do our research assignment handouts guide, instruct, and support students during the research process. So I'm just going to very briefly share some of their major findings, and then I'm going to share with you how we used the research findings to create a workshop to outreach to faculty. The images that you're going to see in just a moment and some of the charts, they all come directly from the PIL study. And then you'll see so most of it is sort of just a quick review, and then you'll see some of the original reports coming from the outreach that we did in the workshop. So in 2009, PIL asked instructors to sort of voluntarily, in a variety of different disciplines from 28 different institutions, they submitted their handouts to the PIL researchers. And then the researchers analyzed 191 of those handouts, and they came from four-year colleges and universities as well as community colleges. They also conducted 15 telephone interviews, and while the research topics were on a broad variety of different topics, 83% of those handouts were that sort of standard research handout. Also, 60% of the handouts recommended students consult the library shelves over other resources like, our databases, the library catalog, course readings. What I thought was really interesting about this finding is that in an earlier PIL study, the researchers discovered quite the opposite in our student research behavior, right? They go to the web to start their research. When the handouts did guide students to the library research databases, they did it in a very generic way. So the handout might say, use library databases, use college databases. I wanted to give a direct quote from the study, which was really one of my favorite quotes from the study. And the researchers wrote, in regards to this finding, handouts felt like city road maps with no street names included. I love that. Only 13% of the handouts suggested consulting a librarian, and also a few handouts provided specifics about contacting the instructor if they needed help with their research assignment. And this is also a very important finding because in an earlier PIL research study, 82% of the students that they surveyed said that the most helpful, the source that was most helpful to them when they were conducting their research was to be able to contact the instructor via email with questions they had on the research assignment. Only 18% of the handouts covered plagiarism, and when they did, it was more about, what are the penalties, right, rather than how do you avoid it. So what I've gone over are just sort of the major findings from the PIL researchers, but I also really wanted to stress this major finding. And this is a direct quote from the study. The majority of handouts placed more attention on the mechanics of preparing a research assignment rather than on other important areas like getting started, defining the topic, evaluating the information. This is just you might not be able to see in the back, but this is sort of illustrating the common properties of the handouts. And for those of you up front, you'll see that this is an example of sort of those mechanics that were more common in handouts. And then if you compare it to this chart, where you see much lower percentages of handouts that included information about evaluating the information and about how to, and strategies for avoiding plagiarism. I'm now going to be sharing with you how my colleagues and I used this PIL study to develop a workshop to outreach to faculty. I'm from Phoenix College, which is one of the 10 community colleges in the district of Maricopa County, and I make a shout out to my colleagues back there who also come from Glendale. Do you see yourself on the map? Yes, okay. So the little red flags, those are just representing the 10 different colleges. The workshop that I'm about to describe to you, it was developed by a district-wide library committee called the Information Literacy Group. And one of the goals of that group is to promote information literacy across this district. When we initially advertised the workshop, 40 faculty immediately registered. And our room only held 40 faculty, so we immediately closed the registration. Unfortunately, only 21 faculty showed up on the day of the workshop. So one thing we learned is that faculty oftentimes will be sort of no-shows. The next slide, I don't expect you to read the content, but I wanted you to be aware that it was a 3-hour workshop. And we tried to keep lecturing down to a minimum. We had a lot of small group work, some hands-on activities, and group discussion as well. The goal was for participants to gain a greater appreciation of the importance of a well-designed research assignment handout, and then they were also supposed to leave the workshop with specific details, resources that they could use to better their own research assignment handouts. So the workshop really starts with just a very quick overview of the PIL research studies they have a wonderful YouTube channel, so just a very short video, and then we had a discussion about the findings. Then we broke the participants into groups of 3. And each participant received this checklist. And I apologize in the back, I'm sure you can't read this. But the checklist is divided into 3 sections that match the handout characteristics that the PIL researchers looked at when they were analyzing those 191 handouts. So it's divided into that instruct, guide, and support. Then the participants were also given sample research assignments where they would use this checklist to sort of score the assignments. As a group, they had to come to a consensus in regards to how they would score the handout. Also, at the bottom of this, which is cut off, there were 2 questions that asked the participants to answer. What did you like most about the handout, and what did you dislike most about the handout? So here's just a quick shot of faculty doing this in groups of 3, a couple little shots there. They were given 7 sample research handouts in a variety of different disciplines. When I did this to practice, I was really fast because I'm a librarian and I knew exactly what I was looking for. I was like, ooh, they have it. No, they don't have it. When the faculty did it, it took them, they only got through about 2 or 3 handouts in that critique before we had to bring them together to have a little discussion. All the groups, and please don't worry that you can't read this content, all the groups got this handout, and I just am showing this to show you it was just a 1-page research assignment handout in the field of biology. So everyone was asked to start with that one, and then they could pick one of the other 6 to critique. I guess one thing I wanted to stress is that there wasn't like a perfect example and a terrible example, rather that each of the handouts had their own strengths and weaknesses. So if I go back to that checklist, what would happen as they were scoring, let's say the handout did a wonderful job in terms of those mechanics, the assignment requirements, they might get a high score, a 3, but then in terms of the research guidance, they may get a lower score. I really like this picture, and I apologize for people in the back who might not see it, but can you tell that there's someone like laughing in the background there? There's a woman in red, and she's laughing, and the woman who has her hand up, this is when now we're having a full group discussion, and she's got her hand up. She's a biology faculty member, and they've just finished critiquing that biology research assignment handout, and she's raising her hand and she says, I teach biology, but I have no idea what this research assignment handout is asking students to do. So everybody's laughing because they're like, really? She's like, I don't get it. One thing that would happen during this group discussion is instructors would say, well, I tell my students that all the time. We talk about it in class all the time. So anytime those comments came up from faculty, I would remind them of this PIL research finding. 76% of students surveyed considered written guidelines about course-related assignments to be one of the most helpful materials that an instructor can provide. So this idea that it's not enough just to say it in class. This is a blown-up portion of the checklist. This is the research guidance section. And in yellow, I'm highlighting that there were sections of the scoring that dealt with finding and using information sources. In order for our faculty to be able to do that in their research assignment handouts, we had to make sure that they were aware of what are the resources that are available to them. So after the group activity, we introduced them to our district LibGuide and also each college library's website. And this is just a quick screenshot. This is what our LibGuide looks like in terms of our shared online resources and services. Then we took a break, and I got to tell you, the break was great. We had food and water for the faculty, and they were so happy, like they'd never gotten food before at a conference. And so I highly recommend that when you do your own workshop. It really gave them a lot of energy, and I have to tell you, even on the evaluation form, someone wrote, thanks, too, for the snackies. Ooh, okay. When we came back after the break, we took about 45 minutes where faculty practiced searching the different library resources within their discipline. And we did give them a worksheet that, very simple worksheet that they used to go through that process. At this time, we also passed out little gifts, little like library paraphernalia. We all have them, the staplers, the highlighters, and stuff like that. So as they were finding things, to validate them, we'd give them little prizes and things like that. Along with the online library resources, we also wanted to stress our library services. And this is a photograph of our virtual reference coordinator, and she's explaining our Ask a Librarian 24/7 chat service. This shot is purposefully busy because I wanted to highlight a mistake that we made. At the last part of the workshop, the last about 15 to 20 minutes, this was the time set aside for the faculty member to reflect on how they would make changes to their own research assignment handouts. And they were encouraged to bring in their own handout, which a lot of them did. At this point, participants got this new 3-page long checklist. On the first page, it matched those same 3 categories, but we added all this extra content and URLs. On the second page is like every other imaginable thing that we wanted them to make sure you don't forget this, don't forget that. It's crazy. It's really too busy, right? And then the third page is they're asked to identify in bulleted points the changes that they're going to make. Then we asked them to pair up and share their changes, which they actually were able to do. They did sit and talk about how they would change and improve their research assignment handout. But I don't think this comes as any surprise. In the evaluation, a faculty member said, instead of giving us 2 checklists to evaluate research assignment handouts, use either the one used in the national study or the one designed by the Maricopa librarians. And it's like, yeah. So we learned that pretty quickly, that was a little overboard, that second checklist. And when we did the workshop the second time, we did improve that. At the end of the workshop, of course, they get that little satisfaction survey, and, everything was really good, happy. But I don't want to spend too much time on that because I really want to get into more about, well, what did they learn? What was the effect of the workshop? So before they leave, they're asked a couple of questions, and one of them was, describe one common pitfall of research assignments. And to my surprise, many of the faculty focused on the pitfall of not including the librarian in the research assignment handout. So here are just some sample little quotes that get at that. All of the faculty were able to, they listed something that fit with the PIL research. They also were asked to list at least one essential handout element. And here again, all the faculty listed something that fit with the PIL research findings. Here's just a couple examples I'll read to you. One of them said, list resources and citation examples, provide guidance on how to select a topic, how to avoid plagiarism, provide mini deadlines, include actual links to major databases. The last question that they had to answer was, how will you use some essential elements to redesign your own research assignment handout? And here, everybody wrote something that really I thought was manageable and, again, fit very well with the PIL findings. Here's one example. I'm planning to tweak my research assignments with some links to the LibGuide, the Ask a Librarian info. I'll also create a matrix for evaluating sources that students will need to turn in. Of course, really, the follow-up to this workshop is, well, what happened after they left the workshop, right? You know, did they actually do anything? Did they make changes to their research assignment handouts? So 6 months later, I contacted the participants at this workshop, and I asked them, what change did you make, and how did this improve the quality of the work done by your students? And so far, I've gotten 3 responses. I know. We'll see if I get more. But here are the first 2. These 2, they weren't able to answer the second question about what if you saw changes in the quality of the work done by your students, because it's too early in the semester. But the first person said, my handout did not change as much as my conversation in class. I'm introducing the CRAP test. You guys know all okay. She says, I'm introducing the CRAP test and having students turn in a CRAP form for 2 sources on their upcoming informative speech about a piece of art. They love the CRAP. So do we. And the second one, just very simply, but I still think it was a worthwhile change, wrote, I added specific information on how to cite sources with examples. Here's the third response, which is a little more detailed. The faculty member wrote, it encouraged me to meet with a librarian faculty at our college for her to review my research essay assignments and to look for ways to improve the way I share information resources with my students. For example, I revamped the way I discuss citing materials and accessing sources in the college's database. And then in response to that question, you know, well, what change did you see in student behavior? The faculty member writes, I have noticed that students have less questions about how to do the assignment, and I'm generally getting more college-approved sources instead of random websites from the internet. This is a really interesting response because it matches absolutely perfectly the last recommendation in the PIL study. And I'm going to read this direct quote to you. This is what the researchers write at the very end of this study. We realize the recommendations we make here may take many hours and a great deal of thought to implement when faculty have few hours to spare. So we offer one last suggestion. We suggest contacting a librarian for help, ideas, and inspiration. I love that, inspiration. We did, what I just described was a workshop that took place last fall. We redid the workshop again this spring, and in this is just a little advertisement. It was promoted through our district Center of Teaching and Learning. We also have had a librarian do a condensed version of this workshop, just 50 minutes long, at her unique college. And there's also plans to make this workshop an online workshop. This is my last slide. And this is a screenshot from Projects Information Literacy's website. We have a link to a LibGuide about this workshop, and PIL, which is linking off of the PIL's website. So it's under this little heading that says Practical PIL. So I really want to encourage you to use this guide to help you design your own workshop based on this PIL study. So when you go to that guide, you're going to see our agenda, all the checklists, the assessment evaluation forms, the Prezi, recommended resources. It's like all there for you. So we hope that, that you'll get to use it. The only thing that's not there are the 7 sample assignments, research assignment samples and handouts. And if you are interested in that, just drop me an email and I can send those to you as well. I'm now going to introduce Cathy from UC Irvine, who actually comes from an institution who participated in this study.
Okay, so I'm calling my presentation UC Irvine's Project Information Literacy in quotes, and you'll see why. We did participate in the, or at least 6 faculty on my campus did, participate in the assignment handout analysis. I don't know if any of you have worked directly with Allison Head, but as soon as she gets an email from you, she calls you on the phone and becomes your best friend. So if you have any questions about this study, she's very accessible, and I would encourage you to contact her. Our content analysis, which, as previous speakers said, you do get your own individual report from them. There were only 6 handouts from UC Irvine. They did cover the full spectrum of subjects, but really that's not a statistically significant sampling. But what we found was pretty similar to all of the other handouts. So, you know, students were writing research papers. They provided mixed guidance. A few of them did require or recommend online library scholarly research databases. The one thing that bothered me was that none of them mentioned consulting with librarians for assistance with an assignment. So I did share this information with the librarians at my institution, but really what struck me about some of the PIL findings was this whole idea of what I call anecdotes versus evidence. These are quotes from the PIL report because in addition to the handout assignments, they also did focus groups with faculty. So these are the things that faculty, and basically I would step back and say these are probably faculty who are teaching introduction to the major courses, Sociology 101, Anthropology 101, or upper division subject-based courses. So these are subject area, and these 3 quotes did come from 3 different subject areas, but they're all saying, my students don't know anything about doing research, and so I either have to cover it all or I assume nothing. So the question occurs, well, what do they know? And that is a question that I actually have been wondering about for a really long time. So this was inspiration, or one part of the inspiration, for me to design what I'm calling our Yusuf Lip Slop something project. And there were a couple different motivations for us to participate in this. One of them was simply to assess the library's contribution to student learning. The statistics that I have up there from 2009-2010, which was a year actually before we did this study, tell you how much time and effort and personnel power goes into instruction in my library. 473 sessions taught. We reached almost 11,000 students, almost 600 contact hours. So this is a lot of effort that the library is putting in to helping our students become information literate. The other sort of motivations for this is that our campus was participating at this point, and still is participating, in the WASC accreditation process, and all of the schools on campus were expected to come up with student learning outcomes, and in order to encourage departments and schools to do this, the campus provided money through an assessment grant project. Departments and schools could apply in 2 ways. One was to assess or develop learning outcomes for their particular major or school, or they could assess a general education learning outcome. And so I applied and got funded through the second category because information literacy is articulated as a general education learning outcome for both our lower division and our upper division writing courses. So because students are expected to be able to demonstrate this by the time they complete their lower division writing requirement, I was eligible to apply, and I did, and I got money to do it. So the research question that I investigated was, and actually this was a two-part study. I'm only telling you about the first part. And I'm actually giving you what I'm calling the Reader's Digest children's version, because I really collected a lot of data. I'm still looking at it, analyzing it, and thinking about it, what it implies. But the real question, you know, a simple question: what do first-year incoming students know about library research and library resources when they come to UC Irvine, and what do they know by the end of their first year? So this really focused not on transfer students, but just on those first-year students. What do they know when they come, and what do they know at the end? And so in order to do that, I had to do an assessment tool selection, figure out how I was going to measure. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? Well, we'll just ask them, and then we'll look at it, and then, okay, how are we going to ask them? All of those things. So the first thing I wanted to look at was how to assess this. I knew I was going to use a survey approach. I knew that I was going to work with my writing instructors. I also had an advantage in that our lower division writing program, actually our whole writing, all of our writing courses were undergoing assessment. They had an IRB approval, and I could be subsumed under that, so I didn't have to get it on my own. So I had that. I didn't have to go through the IRB. It was considered an exempt project, and so I was able just to move forward. So the first thing I had to do was figure out, well, how am I going to do this? I knew I wanted to do a survey. I knew that there were some things out there that I could use. I thought about sales, but discarded it for a variety of reasons. The ETS product really didn't work for me. The criteria that really was important was cost of administration, because I wanted to survey not a sample of students. I wanted to survey as many students as I could possibly persuade to take this survey as I could. And I wanted to do it twice, once in the beginning and once at the end. It had to be easy for me to analyze this data. One of the things that I've learned in the last year and a half is that I really wish I knew more about statistics. Even how to use Excel better would be a skill that would be very useful to me. So it had to be easy to analyze. And it also had to be customizable, because I had some standard things, and I wanted to craft my questions to the information literacy standards, the ACRL standards, but I wanted to do it in the context of my own institution and the experience that I knew my students could expect to be a part of. So I wanted to have that ability to customize it and yet standardize it to a certain extent. And so what I came up with was I put out a message on the ILI listserv, and my ever helpful fellow instruction librarians, I found out about this St. Olaf College Research Practices Survey. There is a URL behind this, and I'd be happy to share it with people, which they say is freely available as long as you give attribution to them, and you can modify it however you want. So the second link, which I'm not going to try, but it actually does go to an actual copy of the survey. It is wide open, so if you guys want to take it, you can, and I'll analyze that data. But I don't want to click on the link from here. So the thing I liked about the model that the St. Olaf's provided was that it measured attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge about research. So it kind of got all three of the components that to me are important to address when you're thinking about teaching. It asked a lot of questions about how challenging components of the research process were. I was working very closely with the our campus writing coordinator on this project, and he wanted students to give their own personal definition of research, so it had some free text. That turned out to be a really wealthy mine of information, but I also wanted to know, like, what do they really know about research terms, about strategies, how to use sources, and we also asked them a question about the importance of research for undergraduates. So this is just a sample of what the survey looks like. I told students it only has 10 questions, but actually it had about 40 because they were all like this. So they were all like one question, but multiple parts. And for each question, we give them an attribute. Like the first one is defining a topic to meet the requirements of an assignment. And we ask them how easy to how difficult to no experience. And that was really one of the things that the St. Olaf's survey brought home to me. I want to give students the option to tell me they've never done this before, because that's different than it being hard. Never having done it is one thing. Having tried to do it and it being difficult is another. So I really like that, and I included that as a response in all of my questions that kind of went this, used this Likert scale approach. But we also did ask real questions that you would expect a student to be able to do either at the beginning or the end of their first year. So this is simply a screenshot from my online catalog, and the question associated with it is, if you wanted to find other books on this same topic, and it's a book about vampires, what's the best strategy to use? And I list several options. Look for other books by the same author. The right answer is use the subject heading for the book to find other books on the same topic. I think it gives a couple others as well. One of the questions, so now getting into the results, as I said, I was a little bit leery about this, including this question, but Jonathan was working so closely with us, and it was his IRB approval that I was using. So, what is your personal definition of research? So I got this whole gamut of responses, and the first category kind of fell into what I've heard described as the regurgisearch definition of research. You go out, you look something up, you repackage it, and you give it back to the person who's asking it for you. So I think these kind of fall into that category. I think another, what I would call on the less, not as far along developmentally, research is supporting what you already know you want to prove. So you're looking up stuff that supports either what you already know or what you want to believe is true. The next kind of third was getting into the process of it. So there were about a third of the students who talked about the process of collecting information, compiling it, studying it. So I thought, well, that's good. We're moving them along. They're getting that fact that this is a process. It's not just right, wrong. And then my very favorite one is this, and this is not a plant. This is an actual student who said, research is either the creation of new knowledge or the presentation of a new idea, interpretation, using the knowledge sources of other people. I was like, yes, this is why we do this, right? That is a student that we are teaching to, right? This is just a quick slide on the importance of research for undergraduates, probably more of a PR. Not surprisingly, over 87% of them think that this is either very important or important. Then getting into the data, this is where this gets really, to me, really fascinating. And I wish that these slides could be more nuanced, but this is, I think, at least a good visual of what happened over the course between the pre-test and the post-test. So you can see that to our pretest, we had 777 responses. This was about 19% of our incoming student body, so about 4,000 new students. The post-test, a little bit lower, so that 463 responses is roughly 10%. And basically what happened was that over the course of their first year, their confidence in their ability to do research went down. They were not significantly, but it did go down in almost every category except understanding scholarly sources. I haven't done a lot of statistical stuff on this test to see if these are significant, but just visually, you can see that by the end of the first year, our students are a little bit less confident about these abilities they thought they knew how to do when they came in as high school graduates. On the other hand, their competence actually did go up. The students who came in, there was only one category that they went down in, and it's really puzzling to me, which is how to find similar books, how to find books on the same topic. But in almost every category, these students' answers went up. However, the depressing thing about this, if you look at the 50% line, except for citation not required, students, over half of our students still can't answer these questions correctly at the end of their first year. So that's something to work on, and that's really the data that I'm interested in sharing with the subject faculty. I want to stand back just for a second here and say that librarians are not entirely responsible for teaching all of these skills, although we do teach them in our library workshops. But we work very closely with our lower division writing instructors who have shared learning outcomes that include the ability to do research and information literacy competencies as a learning outcome regardless of what course the students are taking. So it's not just the librarians who are teaching these skills and abilities, it's our writing faculty as well. But this is a slide that I'm really proud of. One of the things that we could tease out because of the way that we asked the questions is we knew that not every student would fulfill their lower division research requirement by the end of their first year. And so we were able to take our final results and determine which of those, and this is self-reported, but of the students who self-reported having completed the lower division writing sequence, including the research component, which implied that they had a library workshop, that was 300 students as opposed to 161. Again, in every category, the students who had had library instruction did better than the students who had not. So it did make a difference. Again, the depressing thing is still under 50% of them, or over 50%, depending on how you look at it, over 50% of them still can't answer simple questions about library research strategies and approaches to finding information correctly. So there's still work to be done. This is just a couple other initial findings that I think are useful for us to think about, and I want to make sure that faculty at my institution are aware of. 40% of our students coming in from high school self-report they've never, and so my suspicion is it's probably actually a little higher than 40%, but they will freely tell you, I have never used an index like Academic Search Complete. I don't know what that is. 22% self-report that they have no experience locating the full text of articles. And then I think it's really interesting to look at the comparison between their confidence in their ability, yes, of course I can do research, versus their actual competence, which we can tell is not actually as high as they might think it is. So this just was kind of the summary of what we found. Just a couple comments towards the bottom. One of the comments that we did have a comment at the very end that, you know, do you want to say anything about this survey? Is there anything else you want to tell us? So one of the comments, and this was a little bit representative, was from the incoming survey, this survey showed me what I didn't know and what I need to learn. So even as an awareness tool, I thought that this was a useful exercise, that students are looking at this saying, oh, maybe I do need to pay attention to, you know, what is the best source for finding scholarly analysis of a topic, or what is the best way to generate a list of scholarly references on a topic. Those were some of the questions we asked. And then I love this one from my exit. I admit I only got one, but I still loved it. Not only one comment, this was the only comment that said this. These questions could have been harder. That's what he said. She said. So that was our survey, still doing a lot of data analysis for it, and it also has a second part where we actually looked at student writing to see how it looked, how it exhibited information literacy traits. So that's the topic of another presentation. And yeah, so if you guys have questions for any of us, we have a mic, and please ask them.
Is it on? Michael Yanazawa from Riverside, UCR. It's possible that the faculty may not put all of their contact information about go to see the library, go speak to a librarian in their research assignment. It may be in their syllabus,
Sure.
which is 4 or 5 pages long sometimes. And they've got all their criteria, how they assign their points and so forth. So it's possible that they can put it in multiple places, but that's another area that you could work with the faculty in. You know, with all the online learning management systems, it's in a lot of different places. It may just be that it needs to be centralized. Why do it for every faculty individually when it can be done by the faculty in a centralized way that they can then take as a template?
Yeah, I don't have a response to that because, you know, I wasn't really focusing on the faculty assignment handouts. I was really most interested from that PIL study in the assumptions that faculty made about the research skills that their students had. And that's what I was, well, what do they know? You know, do they? And again, this was just first-year students. I suspect that most of those research assignments, I know the ones from from UCI came from instructors of upper division courses. So there might be a different expectation. So, okay.
I actually had a question for you.
Okay.
The pre and post, you didn't track by student ID, so okay.
No. I did solicit participation in 2 different ways. One was through the writing course instructors. I sent out, please, to the instructor listservs, please ask your students to take this survey. In many cases, some cases, the instructors actually gave points to the students if they would complete it. So I did have their name. I had the names of the students, but I didn't track their student ID, so I can't really match up, for example, how they did on this research practices survey with their incoming SAT scores or their GPA. You know, I can't do that kind of analysis. It's more contained within what the students told me and how I can sort that data. And then the other way I solicited participation, I did a mass email to, you know, all first-year students. We did, because we had the assessment grant, we offered them the opportunity to be entered into a drawing to maybe win something, kind of a, you know, and we did get some responses because of that.
You've mentioned the grant twice now, so could you tell us more about that? And I'm primarily interested in the funding you received for it and what you used that funding for.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Because our campus was doing WASC accreditation, and the faculty, I'm going to say this out loud, were led kicking and screaming into the world of defining student learning outcomes, they had to have ways to encourage departments to develop these. So it was basically a small grant. I don't know the total amount of money that was made available. The library got about $5,000. And basically, what I first initially used that money for was simply incentives to get students to participate. But what I ended up using it for, because, I mean, how many 5,000, you know, how many prizes can I possibly hand out? I actually, at the end of both surveys, still had about $4,000 left, and I was able to hire a library school intern to do data analysis and follow-up. So it was really, that made a huge difference, because I can tell you right now, if I didn't have her, that data would still be sitting on my flash drive doing nothing. So just having one person, she actually worked on more, I think, more on the information literacy rubric development aspect of this project, which was the second phase, but she did organize things, help get things into Excel, do a lot of follow-up with the survey. So that was the biggest difference. And I do also know that when the faculty or departments requested funding, that was basically what they used it for, either to buy out course time so that the investigator could actually do the analysis, or to hire graduate students. So it's personnel intensive. It's not something that you could do, you know, a half an hour at the end of the day on top of everything else you do. You really have to focus on it, and having that support really moved us along in a way that we wouldn't have been able to move as quickly. And so, yeah, so I was really, really grateful for that. Any other questions for my other colleagues about PIL or anything? Everybody's starving and trying to stay awake, so. Okay, all right, well, thank you all for coming.